Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm great. I know this doesn't look like it's spring, but this picture was taken 3 weeks ago. So I'm going to show you a little bit more so you can get a sense of what this is. Let's see. I have to go this way. Okay, I'm
Oh,
going to go this way.
well, our audience needs to know that even though I think this is Scandinavia someplace, that you clued me in, Tom, that this is actually Poland. And I would never have guessed that because I think of Poland as flat.
The Tatry Mountains, isn't that what this is?
That's what you said, yes.
Yes, and it's spectacular. If I could show you the whole picture, you'd see the mountains are spectacular in
Right.
the valley in the actual church, and it does look very much that way. And as you were saying, this is probably taken up near where it borders against the Baltic nations.
Mhm.
But yes, in all these countries, it's just astounding to me how much beauty there is in all these countries. It's just different
Absolutely.
in different places.
Yes.
Um, AI fear, Deirdre.
Yes.
So we're talking about AI fear, and we're doing this because um, this is a topic that, if it's not in the boardroom right now, it will be in the boardroom very soon. But I have to believe it's being talked about because I know it's being talked about in our circles and in our business circles. And I mean, it came up with one of the CEOs that we mentor the other day when I was talking to him about what's going on at his company. And the topic is really being fueled to a great degree by the outside world, by the I hate to say this, but the top leaders of a lot of big tech companies, they're fueling this fear, and it's real. The fear is real, and it's about that these things are going to replace a lot of people soon. And we hear these, what you and I know are somewhat out of context comments from certain CEOs that say, oh, it's going to replace 80% of white collar jobs. Well, you and I will say, okay, that's probably true. Now, give me the slice of the world you're talking about, because it's not going to be 80% of all white collar jobs in all industries around the world at the same time with the level of adoption we're seeing and so forth. So it's a little bit out of context, which is what you're contending. But we're seeing a lot of it in the recent days. It reached a high pitch last week, I think. We also saw some comments about not just replacing, but in the last few weeks, there have been comments, or month or so, it's been comments about how they can really do bad things. Right? Well, yes, of course they can. And this was specifically most recently about the anthropic mythos and that can identify weaknesses. No, but it turns out they're known weaknesses, and these aren't. It's just doing it quicker than we've seen in the past. I'm not saying it's not a dangerous capability. It's just, yes, and we've known it, and we know that it's powerful and it can do these things. We also did a whole segment on OpenClaw, which is an incredibly powerful capability that where someone at a very high level, executive level at Meta, let it get out of control. And it can do wonderful things, but it can also get out of control. And then there have been other people, not the Palantir people. They happen to be certain people that don't become hyperbolic about this, I don't think, as much. But their Maven platform, and there are a couple of other platforms where people have been very concerned about what that Maven platform is doing and can do, and what capabilities, as people dig into even the publicly available data on Maven, how it's showing capabilities that are concerning people. So I have a view on this thing, and I know you know this because I'm writing this trilogy of books about what the future is going to be like for first the organization. This is ahead of the machine. Then the leader, which will be, do you fit? And then there'll be one on the future and the opportunity that we're leading toward. Um, and in there, what I think I see is that we have always had these powerful, incredibly capable technologies. And the first one I would say is water.
Mhm.
The second one I would say is fire. Then there's electricity. We could keep going here, um, all the way up through very complex technologies such as nuclear capability when it's used for the positive, right, for the positive productive use. These things are incredibly powerful and do incredibly impressive things, but they also could do incredibly bad things and dangerous things. But what's happened over time is we've learned about these, we've deeply understood them, and we've learned how to put them to productive use. And we see what happens when we fail to maintain that. And we've seen that on the water side at some point, where you fail to maintain the proper water, not only control of the water, but availability of the water when you need it in certain ways. So we've seen these technologies in our history, and not just our history, but throughout a long history of time. And it's about how well do you understand them and how well do you learn how to control them in these specific cases of using them. And we think of AI, you and I think of AI exactly the same way. And we have a couple of thoughts on this. So with that, I'll say, is this fear deserved? I think it should be respected. The power and the danger should be respected, but fear is not what I would label it. But that's just how I view, and as I always say, this is an opinion of one, but I want to give you the chance now to talk about a more balanced view of this, probably.
You know, Tom, it's almost as if there are two worlds. One is the tech world that is creating this stuff. The other is the world of the human beings who are facing this
Mhm.
stuff right now. And for the humans, you're using the word fear. I would actually say it's an existential angst. And what's interesting is the tech world is completely flummoxed by this. It doesn't understand why the rest of the people, the vast majority of people, have this existential angst. Now, we'll come around to this toward the end of this conversation again. But let's talk about this existential angst. You mentioned job loss and AI crashing the economies. Well, some of this has to do with, I think, on the part of the tech people, a lack of understanding about what jobs are. Jobs are to tech people the technical performance of something, writing a line of code, adding a column of numbers, something like that. Well, you and I know that jobs go far beyond that. There's a human element to the performance of all jobs. Think about even people who are sales clerks at, say, a McDonald's. They're warm, they're friendly sometimes. You know, they help you, they allow for variations in things, they point to the napkins, they help you find things in this. That's all part of being a job, but those are the sorts of things that no AI can do right now. Nor will I think they'll ever be able to do that. When you start moving into what I'll call higher level jobs, the way they're normally perceived, managerial jobs, executive jobs, most of that work is non-technical, non-mathematical. It's working with people. It is using your skills to accomplish something together. It is forming directions. And for us, we've spent a lot of time, done a lot of podcast time on showing how you can use AI models as tools in a human machine partnership, but we're very clear about the humans always leading the partnership. We never say, well, the machines are going to take over and all of you execs and managers are losing your jobs, which is what the tech people are saying. So this is at best bad communication. At worst, well, we'll get to that later in this conversation. But it's more than that, Tom. It's that the perception that all of a sudden AI just sneaks into everything around us. We could have been using an app on the phone, or we could have been doing a process or something, and all of a sudden there's an AI component to it. It's as if very slowly we are all perceiving AI at its present state of incomplete perfection, I'll put it that way, just sneaking in and taking over. I couldn't help but remember the phrase "the administrative state," which a lot of people in politics were saying that the federal government's becoming. Well, it's almost as if we're getting, without even realizing it, an administrative state with AI being the administrator. No people in there running the processes. It's all AI, and there is no appeal. Their decision is final. This is existential angst for people. What happens if I have a real question? And then there are things like AI slop just taking over our phones, taking over our feeds, just taking over our mental space, and so forth. Beyond this, increasing reports of people losing their grips on reality when working with chatbots and committing suicide or going out and committing murders or committing other crimes simply because a chatbot told them and facilitated their committing crimes of one sort or another. And this is mind-boggling when you start to think about the frequency with which we hear about these. A sense that people are losing their ability to think for themselves, particularly students who are working on devices all day, which means they're working with AI all day. And what is this doing to their mental states? How is this affecting their ability to interact with people, to actually get things done in the real world? And a real existential bit of angst out there is we keep hearing that AI is learning to code. So does that mean it can create itself without humans controlling the whole process of the You're laughing. You are laughing. But the things I'm mentioning are things that I am seeing repeatedly in the press, online, in my sources that I check all the time. All of this is existential angst, and it's not a good state for people to be in. Meanwhile, there are more realistic issues that people are dealing with, which just piles on top of the existential angst. Things that we all know now that AI algorithms are driving what we hear as news, whether it's news or not, whether it's a complete picture or not, so that no one has a sense that they really know what's going on anymore in the world, with some validity behind the choice of news items to see. Beyond that, we see these data centers being built all over the place at a cost to people. Electrical bills are rising. People, all of a sudden, people wake up and there's this big building on the other side of the fence and so forth. In some communities, places like Northern Virginia, it's nothing but data centers as far as the eye can see, from what I hear, and so forth. And yes, the tech companies say, well, we're going to pay for building the data centers, we'll pay for the electricity. But stop. The electricity has to be generated somehow. We all know that our electrical grid, by and large, is not perfect, far from perfect. It needs a massive upgrade, and that's going to come into our electric bills here. So there's that whole factor there, and we're not hearing good answers to it. Another one, the increasing surveillance. I can't walk down the street without being filmed at almost every moment. Security cameras, license plate cameras capturing all of the license plates, video feeds all over the place. It's a sense that my Easy Pass, another one, whenever I go through Easy Pass, it's recorded. A sense that all of these electronic tools, many of which are connected with AI or rely on AI in the process somewhere, mean that there is no more personal privacy, that every step I take is being captured and recorded and could be traced if someone wanted to trace me. And that's a very unsettling feeling. It's one of the reasons I go hiking in the woods where there are no cameras. I think, I don't know. But anyway, and it's just this whole sense with everything I'm talking about, that everything is becoming depersonalized. And fear is a good way to do it. Existential angst is a good way to put it. I'd also add on top of that that this is wrong. A sense that people have that lives are turning wrong because we have no say in the deployment of this technology that can do heaven knows what and change our lives heaven knows how. And this is not creating a good state of mind for us humans in relation to technology and the tech companies. I'm going to turn it back to you, Tom. I've been talking for a while. So why don't you go ahead?
So it is a generational disruption. That
Yeah.
is for sure. We believe that, you and I believe it firmly, that this is a generational disruption. And we've said this so many times, we're gonna sound a little bit like broken records. This is much like the internet was 30 years ago, um, when it moved from the research aspect to the commercial aspect, which is what we're seeing now. It's moving from into the commercial. But I was speaking with, as you know, one of the CEOs that's part of our group, and his company produces this technology, AI technology, and sells it in various forms. But he said, since I'm not naming him, we won't be violating anything here. But his point was that his customers are struggling to see positive ROIs with what they're doing. Right
Mhm.
now, you and I believe that will turn around here because there are two ways to use these things, and we think that so much of the use is this what you and I would call a vertical use. It's going deep. It's functionally oriented, and it's 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 productivity oriented. It's enhancing productivity. And we've known this for a very long time. I mean, even 2 years ago, we have a colleague from Columbia who was working on these things. And his point was it's process automation. That's where we're really getting, but process that's functionally oriented. We call those vertical because they're functionally oriented. It's supply chain or marketing or sales or some form of programming. Incredibly powerful. As you know, I was briefing you on two things I've been doing this morning, and they're both deep Claude co-work uses, and where I'm having it actually build skills for me to automate processes that, again, are vertical processes. They're not where you and I think the real value is longer term to business, and that's the horizontal processes.
Right.
That's where the real value is going to be achieved in our view. By the way, not to diminish the value that will be there in the horizontal frame. It's just that needs more work. And we think it's really going to be turbocharged when it is combined with these horizontal processes that we think and we look at and call they're the flows of value, or what traditionally in business education has been called value chains. These methods of delivering values, and when it was called value chains, it literally was like a chain. Each rung of the chain was a function or a
Mhm.
task or a piece of value that was chained together in a horizontal way to show how could you create value in an organization. And our point is that we've shown through a number of our videos how you can actually take today's LLMs and do it yourself
Mhm.
without any kind of customization and get value right away. Now, will you get the most value? No. Will you need somebody to help you? Would you want to embed it deeper, maybe even run your own instance of these models? Probably. But you can do it today, and you can achieve value today, and you can build to that level today. But because this is a generational change. It's much like all those technologies that we have seen, such as the internet, coming here. And we talked again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, that you have the top leaders or best understand this by using it. And me using it all day long, every day, for almost everything I do, and me using it sometimes deep vertically, sometimes deep horizontally, you really do understand what these are. You and I have discussions about the limitations of this thing every single day, and we laugh about these concepts of AGI. I mean, it's going to have to show me stuff way beyond what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing some pretty sophisticated stuff before I'm going to say it's getting close to functioning like a human being. I mean, I was complaining about it, complaining, I shouldn't say I was complaining. Uh, what I was doing with it was incredibly valuable. It makes me look a lot better in certain instances. But I was saying that it's so far from being at the human level of being able to absorb and understand the subtleties of what I'm doing. And an example of this, and I know I'm talking over what the time allotted for here, Deirdre, but I do want to make this final point, though. I do want to make the final point. And that's the point that what I was telling you a couple of days ago, I think it was yesterday actually, was that I was doing research. I was doing what you and I would consider vertical research. It was not wanting me to do that research. It was working, it was fighting me every step of the way for whatever reason. We're not sure why. We think it was because it doesn't want to expose that topic, because the topic is probably a little too close to home for some of these models. But I was using a very clean model, and I had to really push it to get it to give me the answer. It did eventually give me the answers I wanted, but it took real work. Um, and I had to push it really hard and recognize that I was running up against, as you said, I was running up against some guardrails that were put there. And then there's the opposite, which is the confirmatory nature of these models. They tend to confirm that you're on the right track, even when you aren't, because it's learning from you and it's trying to make you feel like you want to continue to engage. And there's a whole set of reasons why it does that. So, is this real? Yes. And we think, though, that there's a way of looking at this and saying by applying the power in two different ways, horizontally and vertically, will be the way, learning that you can do that and learning how that's going to be done, you can get immediate value beyond what you're seeing today on the vertical side. But that's going to take people that have a different way of thinking about a business. I know I've taken way more than the time you have allotted on the screen for me on this, but that's the essence of how you, at least the way I think you and I tend to think about this, to talk about how do you now turn this thing into something that's more positive.
A few steps before we get there, though, Tom. AGI, talk about existential angst. I mean, there can't be a topic that is more confusing to most people than the idea that these machines are going to outperform humans. Now, I don't think we'll ever reach AGI. I don't think you think it either. But this is just part of the conversation out there, and we have to be aware that it just keeps popping up and all over the place, and it just creates a bad sense toward this emerging technology. One theme that I've seen talked about is what exactly is this stuff? Is it a general purpose technology? Something like indoor plumbing or water, mentioned that, or the internet, even, something that underlies the work generally being performed? Or is it something else that performs the work itself without being an underlying technology? This is actually a very important point. Not that I spend much time thinking about it. To my mind, it is a general purpose technology. But it's where some of the conversations are going in the press, which are just driving people bananas. For example, I was reading something about, well, if this is more than a tool, if it's something else, then should it be allowed to claim copyright for the works that it helps people write? Now think about that, Tom. Can you imagine? But by the way, in my opinion, never. And for multiple reasons that we don't have the time to go in on this video. But in terms of existential angst, are you saying that if I use one of these tools to help me draft a letter, it can claim copyright of that? Or if I use one of these tools, as you did, to create a presentation, who owns the copyright of that presentation? This is where some of these arguments, some of the conversation around these tools is, well, sloppy. There's no other way to put it, which is leading to questions like this, which of course create more existential angst. Along with this, we can't forget that we keep hearing about everything wrong with these models. Hallucinations, bias, not only the racial bias we're all familiar with, but also the bias that you and I talk about in our five-step process of an inclination to work in a certain direction, which could be wrong for these machines. We know that all of these models are trained differently, that they all can accomplish different tasks at different level of satisfaction. Well, what does that mean in terms of using a tool as a general purpose technology? We know that the machines themselves likely are trained generically and not sufficiently for a specific company's use, that any specific company has to provide a lot of context and probably more training to get value out of using this. But then we hear stories about younger employees just using machine, whipping it out of the printer and handing it in as completed work. And these are the sorts of things that drive business executives and managers just crazy. The misuse of the technology, the possibility for error here. And then the inherent, and this is my what I don't like myself the most, is this inherent limitation of the whole predictive machine way of working. This is personal because my first name is not a common one and it's difficult to spell. And these AI machines keep wanting to misspell my name. On my iPhone, I have to correct the spelling 3 times before it allows me to accept my correctly spelled, but to the machine's misspelled name. But that's because it's a prediction machine. It knows it knows that generally I before E, so it will get that wrong. It predicts that wrong, or it drops an R, or something else is wrong here. And even when I'm typing in something, out come words that are not the words that I want to use, but it slips them in. I have to triple proofread to make sure that the AI did not, because of its being in predictive machine mode, change the meaning of something that I'm writing. And these are the things that I deal with in a practical sense, having to make sure that this output is valid much of the time because there are mistakes baked into the training of the machine or the way that it's developed. And now I hear people saying that this is going to take over the administration of the world, the administrative state by AI, or it's going to run our lives or do this and that. There's cognitive dissonance here, another term. So we've got existential angst and cognitive dissonance here as problems with working with these machines. So with that, Tom, it occurs to me that you're more positive. I'm doing the downside here. But I would say that you're dealing with the possibilities, I'm dealing with the realities. So back to you for more possibilities here.
So I think that there another way to look at this beyond the vertical and the horizontal, right? How you're applying it is what you and I call simple and complex work. The distinction between simple work and complex work. And Simple work is where you are following a path that we've seen before where people use it to do stuff for them, make it easy for them, write a letter, answer something, do a quick, more advanced search,
Mhm.
get an answer, use it. Instead of following a process like you and I do, which is learning first from the model, what does it know? How well
Mhm.
is it contextually sitting where I am working? And then getting it over there to be contextually in the place that you're working. So you're massaging it. And once you know it's there, then you feed it what you want to do. You feed it all the context. See what it comes back with then. And I've told you that I've experimented with different processes, and I think I found one now that works well for me in being able to do that final piece, which is contextualize, because frequently it would just give you back what you gave it,
Mhm.
perhaps in a different form, perhaps inflated in some way or confirmed in some way. Now, as you and I know, we have a whole process. A set of we call them instructions, but they're the way that we want to be working with the machine. So we have it take negative positions automatically in this process. So it's not confirming back, it's actually questioning back and giving us pros and cons and all kinds of different things. That's a more productive way of using this capability, but it's also the way that you discover what its strengths and its weaknesses are, is when you sit down and try to lay this out. And the other approach that we take is so turning what normal people would think of as a simple job, turning it into something complex. Now, what does that do for you? It means that the quality of what you're doing, if you're doing it, you can speed that quality up. Where it may have taken you 2 weeks to do something, you can do in 2 days or a day. That can be incredibly valuable. It also can be, as you and I see, and I have a bad habit of this, is I stack a bunch of stuff and I go from one thing to the next. And so, can I get a lot of stuff done? Yes, a lot of really deep stuff done, but it's exhausting because I have to keep pushing it and I have to keep massaging it and redoing it. And so, and I'm, like I've said before, I'm using very sophisticated models at a very high level, doing a lot of really interesting things. But this difference between taking simple work and becoming in a more complex way of dealing with it, I think is important. The only way that you're going to really understand this is learning to use it yourself. And then in that process, can you finally start to see how you can turn this, what we're talking about as fear, into something that seems much more like a normal entrepreneur or a builder would approach this is, all right, everything has a downside. How can I use this? Right? How can I use this to my advantage? And you can usually find a way through because the technology is incredibly powerful, but it's not intuitive. It's not obvious. It takes work to try to do that. But essentially, we think about it as if, putting a different view on it, not putting the fear on it for the sake of turning yourself into saying, I'm going to wait and not adopt this, or I'm going to be careful doing this. It's about digging deeper and trying to figure out why do people say what they do, and then trying to understand it so that you can now take it forward, just as any good entrepreneur would do with any technology. We think this is valuable enough to do that. So it's working your way through these things is how we see an approach to come at it. So the first is think about it in terms of vertical and horizontal work, and then think about when you're doing the work, try to move from the simple into the more complex, the more involved, the more sophisticated approach to using this stuff. Then in that process, I promise you, you'll see how this stuff can be used in the context of what you're doing and what your company and business is doing. I'll turn it back over to you, Deirdre.
Okay. Um, you and I have been focusing in our podcasts on the leaders using AI. And that's what you were just talking about now. And we make the point repeatedly, and I agree with it, that it's a very personal process, learning to use the tool, learning to see its value, and so forth. Now, on the other hand, we have a very vocal and active business media who are claiming that this is the latest thing and all businesses out there need to have their AI programs in place, need to be implementing, and they'd better get to it or else their stock prices will drop. With no authority behind what they're saying, but this is the theme that you hear out there. Talk about existential angst, although not for individuals this time. This is for businesses now. Once businesses start to contemplate becoming an AI organization, and we've talked about ways that they can do this for real in some ways, and we'll be talking about it further. But for organizations to hear in the press, to get pressure for a board of directors to say to the CEO, why aren't we an AI organization? And I want this within 3 months, that organizations aren't ready to do this, that no one really thinks through how processes have to change, how risks rise completely, how security is a massive, massive problem, given the way that these models are used, that organizations need rules for use, that probably already I've seen the figure maybe 30 to 40% of employees are probably already using a model to do some things like search or to draft memos, but that's already creating, without the top leaders necessarily being aware of it, a massive quality assurance problem in that we don't know how people are using it, whether they are using the output from the machines as their own work product, whether this is affecting the interactions between the company and its customers, what's being promised out there. So once a leader really starts to sit down and think about this, it becomes, well, a matter of existential angst. Another couple of themes about this for businesses, I'm talking about business implementations now. There's a theme in the business media. And if you read behind the examples in the media, you'll see that people are addressing immediate problems, which frequently are symptoms of a first-class problem behind it. And they may be using the machines to address the symptoms, but the machines don't have the ability to go beyond the symptoms that they're asked about to backtrack to causes. For example, a young employee might say, "Hey, Claude, I have a problem in getting my communications out on time. How do I fix that?" And Claude will probably give a pretty good answer, knowing Claude, a lot of options here. But maybe the real problem is that the organizational structure is no longer valid, that it's an industrial age organizational structure. And for communications to be out on time now, that structure has to change. But Claude would be incapable of seeing that. It doesn't have the context, doesn't have the background. It's a prediction machine, a very good and sophisticated one. Um, but that's part of the problem as well, that the machines may focus people on the wrong place in what I'll call a problem stream. Another thing I'm hearing is this whole use of energy again. It takes a massive amount of energy to install AI in a company with similar massive amounts of money dedicated to doing this. It's a substantial investment for any business. And I'm not sure that business leaders know about this really until they start to get into it. And then they're part of the way in the process, and all of a sudden they have to deal with all of these cost issues. And the costs rise unless leaders figure out how to deal with some of the issues, like the cost of figuring out the whole data situation, which is very expensive. The costs of making sure you have the right people to do the work. That's behind some of this loss of jobs and some of the hiring. It's getting the right people in place to do this, but that's an expensive process. It is making sure you have the infrastructure to deal with things, the cloud structure. You know that tech infrastructure is very expensive. Cloud, security, all of these other things just add cost upon cost upon cost to the AI implementation. And there's nothing to focus the minds of CEOs and the board as massively rising costs within an organization. Another is something you have already alluded to, that there's such pressure right now to go out there and use the agents to automate all your processes. Well, you and I have heard horror stories, frankly, about agents being given something to do and messing it up, not getting full instructions, or being asked to do too much. Agents are very single purpose things, which is why you may need a whole agentic architecture to automate a process using agents. But this sort of thing that doesn't really get talked about. So odds are a lot of companies are using agents incompletely not knowing any better because they're sensing pressure to use these agent things. Another theme you'll see right now is, well, AI is going to replace all of your your SaaS tools. Well, think about that for a large corporation. Think about how much money, how many processes, how much work is based around SaaS tools in an organization. And now this AI stuff, which I can't really trust, is going to replace this. What does it? I keep seeing dollar signs add up as addition to more work on the organization needed to make this work. No one is talking about really how much angst this creates. And then we get to another one, almost circling around to the primal one, the loss of jobs, the loss of people, that any executive knows that people in an organization have tacit knowledge, the knowledge that they gain from doing their jobs. When there are layoffs, all of that tacit knowledge walks out the door. There is no way to capture it now. So it's almost as if when you do these implementations and you lay people off, or you haven't thought through how to apply that tacit knowledge in a case of an AI implementation, which, by the way, you and I would identify as a human-machine partnership issue. But anyway, this is a regression for an organization. It is losing a lot of what it initially had. And then a final point, and this is something you and I have been discussing for years, is that people think they're being more creative, they're being more with it, more hot when they're doing this stuff. Study after study after study has shown that the work generated by these machines is a generic average. It has to be. That's the whole prediction machine aspect of it. That's why you have built into your 5-step process for working with the machines, the human providing context, the human finalizing the process, the human interacting with the machine to get the work product that is needed. So even while people think, oh, it's AI, I must be being creative and getting great answers, no, you're actually getting a generic medium here. And that is going to downgrade an organization's work unless the organization sees the problem and builds a solution into its AI implementations. This is a lot of angst-provoking stuff, not only for people, the general public, but also for businesses. So, Tom, what would help here? And I'll try to watch my vocabulary a little bit
Yes.
as I present
Yeah,
these.
you have some advice, Deirdre.
Well, I think the
You have
tech,
that New England, this is when the New England in you comes out really hard.
very hard. Tech leaders need to think about what they're saying before they say it. Very frankly, and this ties back to the whole issue that tech leaders do not perceive AI as a simple tool, like a new internet. They perceive it as something else, and they can't stop talking about the something else without understanding about the existential angst in people in business. In legislatures, the tech leaders are creating problems for themselves by not understanding how to communicate. I mentioned earlier that this is a communication problem between the tech people and the rest of us, and this is part of it. The tech leaders need to have more awareness of how their comments are being taken, more awareness that every time they talk, they say something that hits most of our ears wrong. They need to think through their behavior. There's a lot of concern. You'll see this comment all over the place. Who gave these 4 or 5 guys the right to rule the universe? There is a lot of fear in the very fact that there seems to be no perception of limitations on the part of some of the tech companies. And this is going to backfire on them in terms of legislation, in terms of adoption of their technologies, in terms of what they can do. But there doesn't seem to be the perception that anything is wrong in what is happening. It's actually a PR nightmare for them. And it's a PR nightmare that's going to be translated into a legislative nightmare, a business practice nightmare, and so forth. There also, I think, needs to be a perception that the public perception about technology has changed. People love Steve Jobs. He was this neat guy out there doing this creative stuff, giving us these neat phones, these neat devices. I think when Walter Isaacson wrote his book on Elon Musk, was that 5 years ago now or so? People found it fascinating. This is how a deeply creative person works. In other words, there was a lot of respect. And in America, there has been a lot of respect for the creators, the innovators, the people developing new technologies. Now that whole thing is flipped. There is no more respect for the technology industry. And it's because of what we hear and what we see from the tech leaders and their companies as they go forward. This is a problem because unless this is addressed, and you and I both have solutions, but I think I'm not going to offer them or talk further about them. Um, there is going to continue to be the fear and the existential angst, the resentment, the resistance to what is being put upon us by these companies. Well, I've been talking for a while, Tom. It's time for you to jump in again.
I would say to try to turn this into what do you do about this? The most important thing I think, and it's something that you and I talk a great deal about, and it's the whole focus of this book trilogy that I'm writing, also the focus of what you're doing with position papers. Um, it's you looking forward, that this is not the time to look backwards. And because it's moving too fast, and you cannot take your eye off this ball. That time is not your friend in this world of technology. There, it really isn't. You have to understand what this stuff is doing, what it's all about, because you are expected as somebody who's a top leader or a builder of a business. Your job is to understand what's going on and to decide, have a an informed view of what you do about it. And it's really, this is hard. We don't deny that being well considered in this territory is difficult.
Mhm.
And it's also easy to be, as you were pointing out before, limited in your context of how you're speaking about it. And that can be really bad. and it can be not helpful to you as somebody who's in a completely different context. The characteristics of this technology are incredibly powerful, but with them are all the downsides. You mentioned one of them, which is if you're not careful, it can get and out of control in a way that you might not think of, but it can get ground into too much detail. And then what is it doing? It's burning dollars, it's burning time. And, I was having somebody who's very switched on about this tell me about a product that they're building, and it got caught up in a lot of detail and chewed up a lot of money real fast and didn't get the job done. And I had to today, when I was designing one thing that I was doing, I had to have it do at least two passes. It may end up doing a third. The first one was just to review the whole landscape of what it's doing because it's a horizontal play. Look over the whole landscape and figure out how much work is there, and then come back and tell me. Then we'll figure out how to do step two and how to do maybe step three. But don't try to do the job in step one, which is the way we typically approach what we're doing. And it's so you no under but if you didn't understand what this stuff is doing because you haven't used it, you wouldn't think that way. You wouldn't necessarily think that way. Also, another piece of work I was doing where it reversed the sequence on me. I thought my way of doing it in a manual way would have been different in a different sequence. Then it came back and told me, look, that's going to cause me problems. And here's why. By the way, I agreed with it. It
Mhm.
would not have been the way I would have proceeded. Again, a horizontal process. It basically said, nope, I got to do step four before I do step three. Because if I don't, I'm going to end up getting in a circle. And I said, okay, I get it. But boy, if you're not functioning by taking it apart the way you and I are talking about, discovering for what is it doing? How is it doing it? You can then fly and do incredible things with it. And it can really benefit you and benefit your businesses and provide you an incredible leg up. So the only way you're going to do this again is using it, and that's what the point we keep making is using it yourself so that you can develop a. Why are you doing it? You're developing a well thought, well considered view of what it does and why it does what it does, and then you can start seeing the possibilities as you and I do on how can this stuff be used productively. But you're going to then face the issue of, and this is something you're doing a lot of work on and thinking on, is the issue of adoption. Is okay, we may say, yes, this is something we want to do, but is the world going to accept you doing it that way? And your point is, you're not so sure. And so there's another side to it also. But again, if you're not deep into it, you're not going to see that early enough and you're going to miss the opportunities in the marketplace. So my view is, look, put on, your responsibility side, learn to use it in complex work, learn to use it horizontally and vertically. As a result of that, you'll develop you'll develop what I call a considered view of the technology, and then you can start seeing what it can do. But you need to be facing forward. You cannot be looking backward. You have to be facing forward. And the reason is because the clock is increasing in speed at speeds that we haven't seen in the past. That, my point, if you really want to test out how far along are you in the adoption of these kinds of technologies, it is to answer the question, if you looked at how you did what you do every day, your whole life, personal hobbies, all the way through your professional life, what's changed? Anything? Or when you think about what you do and how you do it, what's changed? And you and I were having this conversation, and I was saying, everything, almost everything I do has changed. Your point about it's in a lot of things we naturally do, but I'm even taking it a step further and incorporating it deliberately into what I'm doing. It's changed dramatically how I function every single day in almost every area of what I do. If you're saying that, okay, you're probably on the right path. If you're not saying that, you need to look really hard at what you're doing. Now, your point about adoption would be there are certain things that preserve your human sanity and your humanness that you need to keep preserved. And that may be reading a real book with no distractions, right? Or
Right.
like you like to do, go outside and shoot birds. Wait a minute, you're not shooting birds. Excuse me, you're observing birds. Sorry,
Watching birds.
sorry,
Never.
sorry.
Okay.
You're observing. You're observing,
Surfing, yes.
observing birds. Sorry, dear. Um, no, but you have your view about how do you preserve that, or go listen to go see the Met, or go see the Philharmonic. Um, just you have your own preserve, just like and like every human being needs to, that is disconnected from this, and that is an important thing. So it's not that you need to incorporate it into absolutely everything, but again, being thoughtful about how you approach that part of your life, so that you do remain the human in the human machine partnership, right?
Hmm.
But if you can answer the point that says, yes, what I do every day is pretty significantly different from what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And it comes into the point of how deep are you going? How quickly can you take it deep? And then how are you able to produce more of what you have originated? It's your ideas, it's your thinking, it's your contribution. How much of that? And it's amazing what you can do if you think about the technology that way. Um, uh, and so it's exciting. It's an exciting world, but listening to the two of us, you wouldn't say we're afraid of it, and the fear is real, and it's gonna chew up the world. And in fact, I think it's going to be quite the opposite. And that's what I'm writing about in the third book, is I think it's going to be very interesting to see where that all heads. But be that as it may, I think I've spent enough time on that. But I think it's that, like all these things, seeing it from the point of view of an entrepreneur, a builder, someone who takes the game that's in front of them and figures out how best to play it.
Hmm.
And the question you and I get asked all the time is, okay, what does that mean? How do I do this? Right? Because that's the thing most people aren't talking about. They don't talk about, okay, if you accept that, how do you deal with it? And that's what we are trying to help you be able to see and then do yourself.
Hmm.
I'm done.
All right. But about that fear and angst, I suggest to anyone listening that the answer is, as with dealing with any fear and angst, is to go out and learn about it. To go out and learn about the technologies so you can participate in the conversation in a valid way with knowledge about the future of AI for yourself, for society, for your business, for the world. That it's only when the knowledge expands beyond the technology companies themselves into the other part of this world, tech companies, the rest of us. It's only when the knowledge expands through the rest of us that we'll be able to have good conversations about the future of AI in our world. So everyone go out and learn. Go out and
And
practice.
observe the birds, right?
Yeah, exactly. Um, that's the solution. So
It is. Deirdre, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long for now.